Today, I wanted to do something a little bit fun and different. So now that 2025 has wrapped up, I saw this really cool thing going around called the Book Bracket, where basically you compare different books that you've been reading throughout the year to determine which one was your favorite. And I'm going to go through something similar here. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to give you a quick view of what we're looking at. Basically, you compare a couple of different months, and then you determine who the winner is of those 2 months, and then it continues on. So I am going to go ahead and make this bigger. Also, keep in mind, I did read more than one book per month this year, but I just picked my favorites of the books that I read in each month to go through. So the first month here is January, and I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. And then I also read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. So two different genres here to compare, but I do often read across multiple genres, fantasy, sci-fi, and horror being my favorite, but I also dive into some literary and thriller every now and then, so you'll see those, and romance too. So there's kind of a whole mix of different things that you might see in my bracket. But for right now, looking at Fourth Wing and How to Sell a Haunted House. So Fourth Wing, I actually enjoyed quite a bit. I know that there was some drama, I guess, on the internet with it of, well, it wasn't actually a very good plot and it was just overblown because of book talk and that's how it became popular and all that stuff. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very cool setting, pretty standard in terms of fantasy at a school with rivals. But it was great. I enjoyed it, and I would continue to read in that series as well. Looking at How to Sell a Haunted House, I did enjoy this one as well. I thought there was pretty good character development, and there's a really interesting twist that happens towards the middle, so I did end up enjoying that one quite a bit as well. But I think of the two, Fourth Wing stood out more to me as one that I really was interested in. And to be honest, these days I'm not a huge series reader because I have so many books on my TBR, so I don't end up reading a ton of books in series. But this one is one I have on my list to continue reading the series. So I think that tells me a little bit more information about the winner here, and I'm going to move that down. Next, we have March and April. March was Blob, a love story by Maggie Sue, and April was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. So Blob was interesting. It's basically a story of this weird blob creature that the main character finds, and the blob turns into a human slowly. And it's an interesting look at, okay, what does it mean to be human? And at what point do you have autonomy and that kind of thing? And so it was an interesting story, but I would say overall it didn't really stand out to me over the year. When I was going back and filling out this bracket, I was like, oh yeah, I did read that book. So it didn't really stand out to me in particular. But for April, Mistborn, I finally got around to checking out this series, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. I thought the magic system was really well developed and interesting with the different types of metals that were associated with different powers. And it was pretty classic in terms of like a heist story and introducing a cast of characters that were charming and interesting. And this is one I would also continue to read the series for. So I'm going to pick Mistborn as the winner of these two. May and June. In May, I read The Ministry of Time, and June was The House of the Cerulean Sea. So The Ministry of Time was an interesting one. Of course, it did have to do with time travel, and there was a bit of a romance element to this one as well. I did enjoy having the two different POVs in this. So there is the main protagonist who is a part of the Ministry of Time, which is a time institute kind of thing that is responsible for monitoring the people that they bring from different time periods into the present. So then we also get some points of view from the main male protagonist who is from a different time, and we get his story through flashbacks, which is really interesting. And I enjoyed the different type of writing in between the two perspectives. So it didn't sound the same across both points of view. It was clearly differentiated in the voice of the two points of view. And I thought that was well done. Overall, the story, I think it needed a little bit more clarity on its point and theme. And I also think it needed a little bit more setup for the twist. So I think the overall story I liked the concept of, but the execution wasn't my favorite. And then we get to The House of the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. So this one was a joy. It was so fun to read. I really, really enjoyed it. The thing about this book is how awesome and creative the different characters are. So this is a story about an orphanage, and the people in the orphanage have different powers. They're not human, they're different creatures, and they have different ways of being able to approach problems. And so overall, I felt like it was very charming. It was a pretty light read in terms of how quickly it was to read. And I still kind of miss the characters. I immediately read the second book after this one, and I miss the characters and want to spend more time with them because they're just so charming and fun and funny, and the plot is good. The point is very clear on the page, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to definitely move forward The House of the Cerulean Sea. July and August, we have Tell Them You Lied and The Death of Jane Lawrence. Tell Them You Lied is a thriller. This one was a bit of a different book for me in terms of the characters are not very likable, which is okay. I don't generally have a problem with that. But at times it became a little bit annoying to read the character, and I'm like, she might be so unlikable that I don't want to continue following her. I did end up finishing the book. I like to finish books that I read generally, because even if they're not my favorite, I usually learn something from them, or I learn how I wouldn't necessarily execute things or what I would improve, which just improves my skills as a book coach. So I do enjoy finishing books, even if they're not my favorite. And this was definitely one of those cases where I did not find that it was my favorite book to read. And I felt like the main problem was just the characters. All of them didn't really have any connection to me. So I didn't find them relatable. I didn't find them interesting to follow. So I think that's really my main complaint with it. And I also felt like by the end, there was a theme that was coming through on like being a woman in certain places of the world. This particularly takes place in the New York art scene. And I felt like she was trying to say something there, but that the theme wasn't appropriately woven throughout the rest of the book, and it just kind of popped up towards the end. And I would have liked, I think, to see that integrated a bit more if that was the main theme that she wanted to bring out in the book. So I think overall, that one was not one of my favorite reads of the year. But going to The Death of Jane Lawrence, I did really enjoy this one. This one is pretty classic Gothic horror, which is one of my favorite genres to read in. I liked the setting. I liked the characters. It was a bit of a slow burn at first, which is to be expected, but things get pretty crazy towards like the midpoint on. So this one I felt like did a really good job of fitting within the genre, and overall bringing some interesting plot points, and watching the protagonist go crazy was a pretty fun adventure. So I'm going to go ahead and move that one forward. All right, so we have Mexican Gothic and Aeon Dragon Eye Reborn for September and October. And I'm kind of sad that these two got paired together because I really, really liked both of these. Mexican Gothic, this is again a Gothic horror, and it's been on my list for a while to read. It's also a little bit of Lovecraftian horror, which I enjoy quite a bit. And there's some environmental stuff in there. So it was just the mix of like the perfect things that Leslie enjoys. Like, this might not be a book that everyone enjoys, but I thought it was a really incredible mix of elements that I love in books. So I overall really enjoyed Mexican Gothic. But that being said, I also really enjoyed Aeon. I thought this one was a YA fantasy, and it's definitely slow at first, but I'm glad that I stuck with it. So this was a 2-book series, Aeon and Iona, and surprisingly, I actually liked the second one better. Iona was more interesting to me. It was faster paced. I was really related to the characters. I was really integrated into this plot and story and how it was going to resolve itself, because some crazy stuff happens towards the end of Aeon. And I also felt like this was a very interesting book that focused well on bringing culture into a more modern landscape. So I overall really liked the emphasis on culture in this book, and I would recommend it for sure, but you have to stick with it for the first half of Aeon, because the first half of the first book is not incredibly, it doesn't keep the pace moving very well, so you have to give it time. But then the second half of the first book and the second book is very good, incredible. But if I have to choose between these two, which I do, this is the point of this, I am going to choose Mexican Gothic. I just thought that was a lovely book, and I really enjoyed that whole process of reading it. November and December is The Spell Shop and Sea of Tranquility. The Spell Shop was very cozy, so this was a cozy fantasy. You can probably tell by the cover that we have a nice cottage on an island, and the main character is a librarian. So there's a lot of cute things going on in this book. And I would say it was pretty well written. I enjoyed the ride. I really liked being able to have that feeling of, I'm just going to get a blanket and some hot chocolate and read through this really light book that has some fun creatures and a pretty light feeling plot. So I definitely enjoyed reading the book, but I would say it's not a Leslie book. So there are a ton of people that I think would absolutely love this book, and I've recommended it to some people that I think it would be a great fit for, but it's personally not the books that I typically enjoy the most. So that, I think, is purely a personal preference. But The Sea of Tranquility, I did enjoy quite a bit. So this one does also have to deal with time travel. I guess I had a couple time travel books this year. And what I enjoyed about it is the structure was very different from typical contemporary books. So you got snippets of multiple points of view based around this anomaly that was happening. So there's a big anomaly that's caused by, I will not spoil it for you, but by a thing. And you see different points of view experiencing this anomaly. And I thought it was super interesting because you actually don't get a ton of in-depth information about each of the plot points and characters within chapters. It's mostly a high-level view of things that are happening, and then occasionally you will get a spotlight scene where you get more in depth with that character or what's happening around time travel that really helps you orient and make sense of everything that came before. Because in the beginning, you don't know what's going on, and it takes a while for you to start putting the pieces together. So I really enjoyed the ending of this one. I thought it was a fast read. I read it pretty quickly and enjoyed being able to go through the different points of view and kind of be excited to keep going. I definitely wanted to find out what was going to happen throughout this book. So that's also why I read it pretty quickly. So of those two, I'm going to move Sea of Tranquility up. So now we're getting narrow, going back to Fourth Wing versus Mistborn. These are both fantasy. Fourth Wing is more romantasy, so it's a mix of fantasy and romance, whereas Mistborn is pretty solid fantasy. And I would say between the two, I actually enjoyed Mistborn more because I felt like it had really good development on the magic system that I really enjoyed. And I found the characters to be super interesting. The world building was really interesting. I thought it was just a really good example of a fantasy novel. So I am going to move that one forward. And then Mistborn versus the House of the Cerulean Sea. I think of the two, the House of the Cerulean Sea is one that I just keep coming back to as a really great example of theme in story and character development, and also using humor in a book. I personally am not the greatest at adding humor to what I write, and so it's something that I really admire when people do it well. And so of those two, I'm going to move the House of the Cerulean Sea forward, which then that automatically makes my choice for this last Mistborn versus House, and I'm going to move that, and that will be my final for the first half of the year. And then we have The Death of Jane Lawrence and Mexican Gothic. Of these two, so they're both Gothic horror. I felt like just the mix of different elements in Mexican Gothic really stood out to me over The Death of Jane Lawrence, and I thought the pacing was better in Mexican Gothic as well. So I'm going to move that forward. And then we have Sea of Tranquility and Mexican Gothic, and I think... So I actually like Sea of Tranquility a lot. I thought it was a unique structure and enjoyed the plot, but of those two, Mexican Gothic takes the cake because I love the environmental piece of this, and the back half of this book is really interesting to me, and the way that things unfold and the revelations that you get about the family is super interesting. So then we're just going to move that up. And now we have The House of the Cerulean Sea versus Mexican Gothic. They're two very different books and feels, but if I'm thinking about which one I like the most, this is actually very difficult for me. So what's interesting is I think I would end up recommending The House of the Cerulean Sea to more people because I think it's more lighthearted. I think it could be interesting to more people, whereas Mexican Gothic might not appeal to as many people. But if we're just talking about me and my preferences and what I enjoy, I really loved the mix of things in Mexican Gothic and the characters and the way that it ended. And that is going to be a book that I will probably reread in the future. It's also going to be one that I come back to for studying and examples of how to execute Gothic horror really well. So of those two, I am going to pick Mexican Gothic as my book of the year. Yay, exciting. So thanks for sticking with me for this little bit of a different format. I just thought it would be a little bit of fun to try and do a review of my books. And I would love to hear in the comments if you have any books from 2025 that really stood out to you and which one you would consider the book of the year of the ones that you read. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.